Great. I'm just going to try and share my screen again. It's telling me host disabled participant screen sharing again. Could you set that up for me? So tonight I thought, just to be a bit different, I'd give a talk from the Old Testament about history. Yeah, see how we go. um, and a bit of prophecy as well. So if it might help to get your Bibles out, I'm just going to do a few verses at the very start of Daniel chapter 11. Let's see. There we are. I think you should be able to see that now. So the book of Daniel, it's got a lot of really famous stories in it. It's got Daniel in the lion's den. You got, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego in the fiery furnace. You got the writing on the wall. But the second half of the book of Daniel doesn't really get quite as much attention because it gets into some really heavy prophecy, very sort of cryptic and mysterious. It all starts off in about chapter 7, where there's like the four beasts rising up out of the sea. And I think that's been pretty well explained in other talks, that those are the four ancient empires of Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Then chapter 8 goes into a bit of prophecy with some more detail about Alexander the Great and the Greek Empire. Chapter 9 is the 70 weeks prophecy, which foretells the arrival and the death of Jesus. Chapter 10 is more prophecy about the Greeks coming and defeating the Persians. But chapter 11, which we're going to look at specifically today, it's a very detailed and specific prophecy about the Greek Empire, which is also known as the Hellenistic period, because the Greeks called themselves the Hellenes, or the Hellenic people. That was a period of time from the 420s BC right up to the time of the birth of Christ. It's the period of time between the Old and the New Testament. That's obviously not covered in the Bible, apart from here in Daniel, where it's given in prophetic terms. Now, this section of prophecy it's so specific and it's so accurate to the events that took place that a lot of historians actually describe it as a work of fiction, or that they say that it must have been written after the fact, after all the events took place, because of just how accurate it is. Um, and now, when you read Daniel 11, it's pretty cryptic. If you don't know the history of that time, which I didn't know that history before starting um, researching for this talk, uh, Daniel doesn't mention the specific names of places or people or kingdoms, so it's kind of up to the reader to figure out who everyone is. So what I'm going to do for a very small section in today's presentation is have a look at a side-by-side comparison of what Daniel says in his prophecies, and then have a look at the history books and see what actually took place in ancient Greece. And hopefully by this, I'll demonstrate that everything in the prophecy was fulfilled exactly the way that it was described, which is a real amazing testament to the power of God. Now it's incredibly dense, chapter 11, and I'm only going to get through the first 8 verses. I've already written uh, like another 3 parts to this, which it gets through about 10 verses each part. So this is going to be going on for a long time. So I hope you enjoy this because there's a lot of it. Um, so the first few verses describe the end period of the Persian Empire. It starts off in verse 1 of chapter 11. It says, "Also I, Daniel, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and strengthen him." So we can look back through history and figure out who this Darius is, because there's a few different Dariuses throughout history. Um, this one is Darius II, who is actually a Persian and not a Mede at all. So what probably happened here is that Darius was given the title of the Mede after he defeated the Medes in about 409 BC. That they had an uprising, there were rebellion. He took all his Persian army and put down the rebellion. It was quite common in ancient history to be named after the great victories that you had. So in another case, several hundred years later, there was a Roman general named Scipio who defeated a nation that was called Carthage in kind of the North Africa, Libya area. And since he had this great victory in Africa, he was called Scipio the African, or Scipio Africanus. So the same way, Darius, even though he's not a Mede, he's called Darius the Mede because he defeated the Medes. Verse 2 says, "And now I will show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than them all. So Darius II is where we're at the moment. There were 3 more kings. I think here we are. Who are Artaxerxes II, Artaxerxes III, Artaxerxes IV, and then just to break the sequence, Darius III, who was the fourth king who stood up. Darius III is the person being referred to as the fourth who shall stand up, who shall be far richer than all of them. The second part of verse 2 says, and by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. This image here, this map, shows the extent of the Persian Empire at this point in time. It was absolutely huge. It covered basically the entire known world. It was made up of 30 separate kingdoms, and Darius ruled all of them. And at this point in time, Darius rallied an army of men out of most of these lands, stirring up all against the realm of Grecia. You see, the King Philip of Macedon is way up in the corner here, right at the edge of it. King Philip of Macedon had kind of picked a fight with the Persians in 336 BC, right at the start of Darius's reign. And this was continued on by his son, Alexander III, who'd eventually be known as Alexander the Great, after Philip died. So he picked this fight with the Persians, and so Darius rallied the entire Persian Empire against him. Now, the Greeks and the Persians had actually been fighting on and off for over 100 years by this point. There'd been some really big, very famous battles during this time. There was like the Battle of Marathon, the Battle of Salamis, the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, all that sort of thing. So you can imagine at this point in time, Darius had about had enough of these Greeks and just wanted to put an end to it. So a guy named Arrian wrote a biography of Alexander the Great. And in it, he said, Darius raised up a huge army against Philip and Alexander, as it says in Daniel, stirring up all against the realm of Grecia. Said he gathered 40,000 horsemen, 1 million infantry, 200 chariots carrying scythes, and several elephants. And it said that the army was made up of people from India, Bactria, Sogdiania, Scythians, a whole lot of other places. Basically just names every single one of these realms. So you can imagine how many people live in this area. And he just gathered them all together, exactly as Daniel said, gather all against the realm of Greece. Led this huge army to fight against Alexander. It goes on in verse 3, and a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. This is talking about Alexander the Great. Alexander was the mighty king who stood up and ruled with great dominion. He did everything according to his will, it says, because he won every single battle that he fought. Quite an amazing accomplishment. And went on to do whatever he wanted to, taking over the entire world. This particular mosaic shows Alexander on the left on the horse, defeating King Darius, who's there in his chariot, at the Battle of Issus in 333 BC. And then a couple more years later, I think Alexander's over there this time, and Darius is, where is he? Down here. Alexander defeated him again at a battle in a place called Gaugamela 2 years later. And just continued defeating the Persians all the way. So this map here shows the route that Alexander took. This kind of highlighted area is the Persian Empire as it was, and Alexander just basically rolled through the entire land, defeating everyone all the way through, all the way up to the border of India even, which is a tremendously large area to go through. So about a year later, he took the Persian capital of Persepolis, and after about another 8 years, he conquered the rest of the Persian Empire, and then promptly died in Babylon in 323 BC at the age of 32, making everyone who came after him feel incredibly inferior and left wondering what you're doing, for the rest of your life. But on his way to Persepolis, which is down here, he passed through the coasts of Israel and actually ended up in Jerusalem at one point. While this isn't mentioned in the Bible, the historian Josephus has an account of the events that took place. He says in his writings, "Now Alexander, when he had taken Gaza, made haste to go up to Jerusalem. And Jaddua the high priest, when he heard that, was in agony and under terror, as not knowing how he should meet the Macedonians, since the king was displeased at his disobedience. He therefore ordained that the people should make supplications and should join him in offering sacrifices to God, whom he besought to protect that nation and to deliver them from the perils that were coming upon them. Whereupon God warned him in a dream, which came upon him after he had offered sacrifice, that he should take courage and adorn the city and open the gates, that the rest appear in white garments, but that he and the priests should meet the king in the robes proper to their order, without the dread of any ill consequences which the providence of God would prevent." Um, he goes on to say, "Alexander, when he saw the multitude at a distance, wearing white garments, while the priests stood clothed in fine linen, and the high priest in purple and scarlet clothing, with his mitre on his head, and having the golden plate on which the name of God was engraved, he approached alone by himself, and worshipped the name of God, and saluted the high priest. And when people asked him why he did this, he said, I saw this very person, this high priest, in a dream, wearing these very robes when I was at Dios in Macedonia, who, when I was considering with myself how I might obtain the dominion of Asia, how I might conquer the world, he exhorted me to make no delay, but boldly pass over the sea thither, for that he would guide my army and would give me the dominion over the Persians. I believe that I bring this army under the divine guidance, and shall conquer Darius with it and destroy the power of the Persians. Alexander came into the city, went up into the temple, and offered sacrifice to God according to the high priest's direction." And then this happens, the event that's depicted on the slide. Um, when the book of Daniel was showed to him, which we're reading right now, wherein Daniel declared that one of the Greeks should destroy the empire of the Persians, Alexander realized that he was the person being written about in the text, which is, I think that's just absolutely amazing. Alexander there reading a prophecy about himself, about how he was going to defeat the Persians, must have really, boosted his self-confidence to go and, fight off the Persians with knowing that God was there on his side to take care of it. Well, hopefully he didn't read the next verse, because the next verse, verse 4, says, "And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven." So when he shall stand up, when Alexander reached the height of his power, his kingdom shall be broken. So he died at the height of his power in 323 BC. And without a clear heir to the throne, his empire was divided between these people called the Diadochi, which means the successors, the people who followed after him. These were nobles in the empire. They were his friends, family members, and various generals in his army. And so that entire empire that he had conquered was kind of shattered into these small pieces. Each one of these was ruled by a separate, what they called a satrap, which is the Persian name for a governor or a small king. So without any clear successor to Alexander, he didn't have well, he had a son and an heir, but he was very young at the time, and he hadn't named someone to follow after him at the time. So without a strong idea about who was meant to rule the entire empire after him, the whole place shattered and descended into civil war with everyone trying to grab their own bit of land. And within a few years, a handful of factions rose to prominence. And they were these fellas here. So in 306 BC, which is about 15 years after Alexander had died, in an attempt to settle the question of who's in charge, a man named Antigonus, who kind of ruled this area of Turkey, declared himself to be the king, or a basileus, which is the Greek word for it. But nobody really agreed with him. So 5 other people also declared themselves to be kings. They were a guy named Antigonus, his son Demetrius, who was also in this area, Ptolemy, who ruled the land of Egypt, Seleucus, who eventually came to rule the land of Babylon and Persia, Lysimachus, up there in orange, and a guy named Cassander, who took over Macedonia. And then a few more years later, after about 22 years of civil war, it consolidated into 4 main kingdoms. So that was the Ptolemies down here, the Seleucids, The Antigonids ended up in Macedonia, and the Attalids, another group, ended up in Thrace. So this is 22 years later. The guys who had ruled Macedonia had all died out. The people who were in Turkey had moved over to Macedonia. It basically it left four major Greek kingdoms who remained stable for a while. So as it said in verse 4, his kingdom shall be divided to the four winds. When it all fell out, there were four kingdoms remaining. So it's interesting to compare this here to some of the other prophecies in Daniel. In Daniel chapter 7, verse 6, talking about like the beasts who came out of the water, it says, after this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it four wings of a fowl, and the beast also had four heads, and dominion was given to it. So that the four wings and the four heads representing this Greek empire being split into four parts. It also says in Daniel 8, verse 8, which is talking about again using animals to describe it. Daniel 8, verse 8 says, the he-goat waxed very great. The he-goat was Alexander. And when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. So the great horn, representing the kingly power of Alexander, was broken, and four kings came up in its place. So, yeah, two other prophecies in Daniel sort of recounting the same, or prophesying the same thing that was going to happen. So it goes on in verse 4. When he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven. And not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he had ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those. So his posterity means like his descendants, his children. So the kingdom wasn't divided to his children or his or anyone who came after him. So Alexander had taken a wife from the land of Bactria. Bactria is all the way over here, sort of far distant corners of Persia. She had a very exotic name, which I'll try and pronounce. It's Roxanne. Apparently, Roxanne is an ancient Persian name from the distant parts of Bactria. So Roxanne gave Alexander a son, who he imaginatively called Alexander. But they were both killed when Cassander took over Macedonia. So the line of Alexander the Great actually ended right there. There are no more descendants of him. No one in the world can claim to be a descendant of Alexander the Great. But like it said in Daniel, that his kingdom was not given to his posterity, nor according to his dominion. So it was all broken up, all given to different people. And yeah, over the next 20 years after he died, the land sort of went through a lot of different changes. Now, the next few verses discuss wars between two characters. One's called the king in the south, and the other's the king in the north. Now, this is talking about the Ptolemies, who are down in Egypt, and the Seleucids, who are kind of up in Syria. Now, when it says the north and the south, it's referring to north and south of Jerusalem, which is right about there. So those first few verses in chapter 11 give a bit of an overview of the kingdom, and now of how the kingdoms were broken up. And now we jump back a bit in time and start getting into the specifics about who is who and what and when. It says in verse 5, the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, or the king of the south and one of his princes shall be strong, and he shall be strong above him, so that his prince shall be strong above him, and have dominion, and his dominion shall be a great dominion. So right after the death of Alexander, Ptolemy was the governor in Egypt, down here, which is the southernmost portion of the Greek Empire. And it was already a rich and powerful nation, and it had been an empire by itself at one point. So it says in verse 5, the king of the south shall be strong. He's already got all the might of Egypt behind him. Now this guy, Seleucus, started off as the governor of Babylon. But there was another governor just next door in the land of Media who invaded and took over his area and Seleucus ran and took refuge in Ptolemy's land of Egypt. He escaped from Babylon, went to Egypt, and became an admiral for Ptolemy, um, which is why he's described as in verse 5 a prince. An admiral is, very high ranking person in the army, and so that navy. Um, and it's a kind of prince, I suppose, poetically speaking. Um, and he as the admiral in Ptolemy's army, he built up his own forces, he built up his own army, and used that to reconquer Babylon and take the entire place for himself. So, like it says, one of the princes of the king of the south shall be strong above him. He ended up with a more powerful empire than Ptolemy. So he established his own dominion, which came to be called the Seleucid Empire. It started in about 312 BC, and this became the largest and most powerful of the four Greek kingdoms. So, like it says, his dominion shall be a great dominion. Moving on, here's a bit of a timeline of the two kingdoms. Um, we're quite fortunate to have coinage from all of these times, so we can actually see a bit about what they looked like and how they dressed. On the left are all the Ptolemies, that's the Egyptians, and on the right are all the Seleucids, sort of the Syrians. The guys in Egypt were all named Ptolemy, and they ruled Egypt for over a century. And even though they lived in Egypt, most of them never bothered to learn the local language. They ended up as kind of this ruling class of Greeks above the common Egyptians. And somewhere further down the line, way down there, in about 50 BC, it was Queen Cleopatra. So on the right are the Seleucids, starting off with Seleucus the First. Um, his father's name was Antiochus. So you'll see the name Antiochus pop up several times there. Um, and the capital city of these people was named after Antiochus. It was a city called Antioch. That's the same city where the Christians were first called Christians. Now it says in verse 6, and in the end of years, they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. In the end of years means sometime later. These events take place starting in 253 BC, which is all the way down there. Um, about 50 years after all the dust has settled with Alexander's kingdom breaking up. And by this point, the Ptolemies, they're ruled by Ptolemy II, and the northern Seleucids are ruled by Antiochus II over there. And these two kingdoms have been at war on and off for the last 50 years or so, particularly for the last 7 years since about 260 BC. This latest war ended in 253 BC, and Ptolemy II's daughter, Berenike, was married to the Seleucid king Antiochus II to seal the peace agreement. So, like it says in that verse in Daniel, the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. She was given to the king of the north to seal the peace agreement. It goes on in verse 6, but she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. So the Amplified Bible translated as, she shall be handed over with her attendants and her child and him who strengthened her in those times. So the problem with this political marriage was that Antiochus, the king in the north, he was already married. He had a queen who apparently he liked very much because he named a city after her. His queen's name was a woman named Laodice, and the city named after her was Laodicea, which shows up in the book of Revelations. So in order to seal this peace agreement, he had to divorce his queen and marry this other woman, Berenike, and transfer the inheritance of his kingdom to her children. Now, Laodice wasn't too happy about that, being deposed. And being a former queen, she still had quite a lot of influence in the court. So about 6 years after this happened, she poisoned the king and had Berenike and all of her children killed, and then put her own son, Seleucus II, this guy here, put him on the throne. So, as it says in Daniel, she shall not retain the power of her arm. Berenike, who was married to Antiochus, didn't retain her power, didn't last very long as the queen. Neither shall he stand nor his arm. So the king didn't last very long either, and he didn't stand. He was killed. She shall be handed over with her attendants, her child, and him who strengthened her in those times. So her children and everyone else with her in her faction were killed by Laodice. Verse 7. But out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate. So a branch of her roots. Her roots are her parents, the people she came from, and a branch of her roots is one of her siblings. So in the same year that Berenike and her children were killed, Ptolemy II also died and was succeeded by Ptolemy III. Ptolemy III was Berenike's full brother, one of her siblings. So a branch of her roots shall, out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate. Her sibling came to be the king, which shall come with an army and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north and shall deal against him and shall prevail. So in revenge for Berenike's murder, Ptolemy III came up from Egypt into the land of Syria and attacked the Seleucids in a war that lasted for about 5 years. Now he was victorious and made it all the way up the Mediterranean coast into Syria, and even as far east as Babylon, and made it into the city of Antioch, which was the capital city of the Seleucids. Which, like it says in verse 7, he shall come with an army and enter into the fortress of the king of the north, the fortress, their capital city, Antioch. And as a condition of his defeat, Seleucus II gave away a lot of his territories from Syria to the Egyptians, to the Ptolemies. It says in verse 8, and shall, there we are, and shall also carry captive into Egypt their gods, with their princes and with their precious vessels of silver and gold. So when Ptolemy came up from Egypt, he looted the cities of the Seleucids and took all their gods, took all their gold and silver, and brought them back to Egypt with him. And there's actually a letter preserved from that time, written on papyrus, that says that Ptolemy came and plundered the kingdom of the Seleucids and took 40,000 talents of silver and costly vases and 2,500 images of the gods, amongst which were those Cambyses had taken away to Persia when Egypt was taken. So exactly like it says in Daniel, he shall carry away into into Egypt their gods. He went up to Antioch and took their statues of their gods away. There's another inscription on a temple in Egypt, possibly this temple actually, which says Ptolemy sought out all the temple belongings that had been carried out of Egypt by the Persians and brought them back with the rest of the treasure from the various regions. And then verse 8 continues, he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So although they both came to power at about the same time, Ptolemy did last about 4 more years than the king of the north. The verse 9, so the king of the south shall come into his kingdom and shall return into his own land. So while he was up north attacking the Seleucids, a rebellion kicked off in Egypt, so he ended up returning south and coming into his own land. So yeah, this is a photo of a temple in Egypt. It's called the Temple of Horus at Edfu, which was constructed during the reign of Ptolemy III. So this may very well be the temple where all those artifacts were returned to. So I'll leave it there, but that was the first 8 verses of Daniel 11. There's 45 verses in the chapter, and I can get through about 10 verses per talk. Now, I find history very interesting, but we're not especially here to learn about ancient history. We're here to talk about God and the power of God. And what I hope this talk has demonstrated is just how well the events of history lined up with the prophecies in the book of Daniel. And everything from the who, the what, the why, the intentions of the kings, why they went and took over places, it all plays out exactly as it's written in Daniel. I think it's a really great demonstration about the reliability of God's word. And we can look at the other prophecies and promises in the book, and we can know that they're going to be just as reliable as that. So I'd like to leave that there.